Emil had made sure she was safe, alright. She'd done it by locking Merlin up. Claire dropped her backpack at the bottom of the stairs, where it was easy to grab in mid-run, and spotted a new addition to the lab, a cage, and Merlin was inside it. Oh my god. She took a few steps towards him, navigating around the usual haphazard stacks of books, and bit her lip. It was, as far as she could tell, the same cage that the vampires had used to lock up Shane in Founders Square. Heavy black bars, and the whole thing was on wheels. Vampire-proof, hopefully. Whoever had locked Merlin in had been nice enough to give him a whole pile of books, and a comfy, if threadbare, tangle of blankets and faded pillows. He was lounging in the corner of the cushions, with a pair of old-fashioned Benjamin Franklin-style glasses perched on the end of his hooked nose. He was reading. "You're late," he said, as he turned a page. Claire's mouth opened and closed, but she couldn't think of a thing to say. "Oh, don't fret about the cage. It's for your precaution, of course. Since Anya isn't here to watch over you." He turned another page, but his eyes weren't moving to follow text. He was pretending to read, and somehow that was worse than heartbreaking. "Camille's idea. I can't say that I really approve." She finally was able to say, "I'm sorry." Merlin shrugged and closed the book, which he dropped with a bang on the pile next to him. "I've been in cages before this," he said. "No doubt I will be let out once your appointed guardian is here to chaperone. In the meantime, let's continue with our instruction. Pull a chair close. You'll excuse me if I don't get up. I am a bit taller than..." He reached up and rapped at the bars overhead. "Amelia tells me you have enrolled in advanced placement classes." Claire gratefully took that as an opportunity not to think about how disturbingly reassuring this was, seeing him locked up like an animal in a cage because of her. She read off her class schedule and answered his questions, which were sharply worded with a strange mix of expert knowledge and complete ignorance. He understood philosophy and biochem. He didn't know anything at all about quantum mechanics, until she explained the basics, and then he nodded. "Myth and legend," he echoed, baffled, when she read out the class title. "Why would Amelia feel it necessary? No matter. I'm sure she has reasons. Your essay?" He held out his hand. Claire dug the stapled computer printout from her bag and handed it over. 6 pages, single-spaced. The best she could do on the history of a subject she was only just now starting to understand. "Hurried later, and the books I gave you." Claire went to her backpack and pulled them out, then came back to her chair. I read through Arius and the Golden Chain of Homer." "Did you understand them?" "Not really. That's because alchemy is a very secretive field of study. Rather like being a mason. Are there still masons?" When she nodded, Merlin looked oddly relieved. "Oh, that's good. The consequences would be quite terrible, if they weren't. As to alchemy, I can teach you how to translate the codes that were spoken and written. But I'm more concerned that you learn the mechanics than the philosophy. You do understand the methods outlined in the text for constructing a calcining furnace, yes?" "I think so. But why can't we just order what we need? Or buy it?" Merlin flicked the silver ring on his right hand into the bars of his cell, setting up a metallic ringing. "None of that. Modern children are fools, slaves to the work of others, dependent for everything. Not you. You will learn how to build your tools as well as use them." "You want me to be an engineer?" "Is it not a useful thing for one who studies physics to understand such practical applications?" She stared at him doubtfully. "You're not going to make me get a handful and make my own screwdrivers or anything, are you?" Merlin smiled slowly. "What a good idea! I'll consider it. Now, I have an experiment I'd like to try." "Are you ready?" "Probably not." "Yes, sir. Move that bookcase." He pointed to a leaning monstrosity of shelves that looked ready to collapse. It was groaning with volumes, of course. "Push it out of the way." Claire wasn't at all sure the thing would hold together to be pushed. But she did as he said. It was better built than it looked, and to her surprise, when she'd pushed it aside, she found a small arched doorway. It was secured with a big heart-shaped iron lock. "Open it," he said, and picked up the book he'd dropped open upon her entrance, leafing randomly through the pages. "Where's the key?" "No idea." He flipped faster, frowning at the words. "Look around." Claire looked around the lab in complete frustration. In here? Where was she supposed to start? It was all piles and stacks and half-open drawers, nothing in any order at all that she'd been able to determine so far. Can you give me a hint at least? If I remembered, I would. Minnie's voice was dry, but just a little sad too. She shot him a glance out of the corner of her eye. He folded the book closed again and stared out of the cage, not at her, or at anything really. There was a careful blankness to his face. Claire? Yeah? She pulled open the first drawer near the door. It was full of bottles of what looked like dust, none of them labelled. A spider scuttled frantically out of sight into the darker recesses, and she made a face and slammed it shut. Can you tell me why I'm in this cage? He sounded odd now, strangely calm with something underneath. Claire pulled in a deep breath and kept looking in the drawers. She didn't look directly at him. I don't like cages. Bad things have happened to me in cages. Emilia says you have to stay in there for a while, she said. Remember? It's to help us. I don't remember. His voice was warm and soft and regretful. I'd like to get out of here. Could you open it, please? No, she said. I don't have the keys. Except that she did. There was a ring of them sitting right there in front of her, half hidden by a leaning tower of loose, yellowing pages. 3 keys. One was a great big iron skeleton key, and she was instantly almost sure that it fit the big heart-shaped lock on the door behind the bookcase. The other one was newer, still big and clunky, and it had to be the key to Myrna's cage. The third was a tiny, delicate silver key, like the kind that opened diaries and suitcases. Claire reached out for the key ring and pulled it towards her, trying to do it silently. He heard, of course. He got up from the corner of the cage and came to the front, where he held onto the bars. Ah, excellent, he said. Claire, please open the door. I can't show you what you need to do if I'm locked in this cage. God, she couldn't even look at him. She just couldn't. I'm not supposed to do that, she said, and sorted out the big iron skeleton key. It felt cold and rough to her fingers. And old. Really old. You want me to open this door, right, Claire? Look at me. He sounded so sad. She heard the soft ringing chime of his ring on the bars when he gripped them again. Claire, please. She turned away from him and put the key into the heart-shaped lock. Claire, don't open that. You told me to. Don't. Myrna rattled the bars of his cage, and even though they were solid iron, she heard them rattle. It's my door. My escape. Come here and release me. Now. She checked her watch. Not enough time. Not nearly enough. It was still at least an hour till sunset. Maybe more. Michael was still stuck in the car. I can't, she said. I'm sorry. The sound Myrna made then was enough to make her glad that she was across the room. She never heard a lion roar, not in person, but somehow she imagined that it would sound like that, all wild animal rage. It shredded her confidence. She closed her eyes and tried not to listen, but he was talking. She couldn't understand what he was saying now, but it was a constant, vicious stream in a language she didn't know. The tone, though, you couldn't not get the evil undercurrents. He'd kill her if he got hold of her now. Thank God the cage was strong enough to... He snarled something low and guttural, and she heard something metal snap with a high, vibrating sound. The cage wasn't strong enough. Minnie was bending the bars away from the lock. Claire spun, key still in her hand, and saw rip at a weak point in the cage as though it were wet paper. How could he do that? How could he be that strong? Wasn't he hurting himself? He was. She could see blood in his hands. It came to her with a jolt that if he got out of that cage, he would do the same thing to her. She needed to get out. Claire moved around the lab table, squeezed past 2 towering stacks of volumes, and tripped over a broken 3-legged stool. She hit the floor painfully, on top of a pile of assorted junk. Pieces of old leather, some bricks, a couple of withered old plants she guessed Myrna was saving for botanical salvage. Man, that hurt. She rolled over on her side, gasping and climbing to her feet. She heard a long, slow creak of metal, and stopped for a fatal second to look over her shoulder. The cage door was open, and Merlin was out. He was still wearing his little Ben Franklin glasses, but that was in his but what was in his eyes looked like something that had crawled straight out of hell. "Oh crap," she whispered and looked desperately toward the stairs. Too far. Way too far. Too many obstacles between her and safety, and he could move like a snake. He'd get there first. She was closer to the door with the lock on it than the stairs, and the key was still clutched tightly in her hand. She'd have to abandon her book bag. No way to get to it now. She didn't have time to think about it. The cut Jason had put on her wrist was still fresh. Myrnie could still smell it, and it was ringing the dinner bell loud and clear. She kicked stacks of books out of the way, jumped over the pile of junk, and, with the key outstretched, raced for the locked door. Her hands were shaking, and it took 2 tries to get the oversized key into the hole. When she started to turn it, there was a terrible moment of utter panic, because it wouldn't turn. And then it did. A smooth metallic slide of levers and pins, and the door swung open. On the other side was her own living room, and Shane was sitting on the couch with his back to her, playing a video game. Claire paused, utterly off balance. That couldn't be real, could it? She couldn't be seeing him right there. But she could hear all the computerized grunts and punches and wet bloody sounds from whatever fight game he had on. She could smell the house. Chilly. He'd made chili. He still hadn't taken some of his boxes back upstairs. They were piled in the corner. "Shane?" she whispered, and reached out through the doorway. She could feel something there, like a slight pressure, and the air on her arm shivered and pricked. Shane put the game on pause and slowly stood up. Claire? He was looking in the wrong place. He was looking up at the staircase. But he'd heard her, and that meant she could just step right through and she'd be safe. She never got the chance. Myrnie's hand landed on her shoulder, dragged her back, and as Shane started to turn towards them, Myrnie slammed the door and turned the key in the lock. She didn't dare move. He was crazy. She could see it. There was nothing in him that recognized her at all. Amelia's warning screamed through her head, and Sam's. She'd underestimated Merlin, and that was what had got all the other would-be apprentices killed. Merlin was shaking, and his broken hands were crunched into fists. His blood was dripping on an open copy of an alchemistry textbook that lay by his feet. "Who are you?" he whispered. The accent she'd noted the first time she'd met him was back, and strong, really strong. "Child, what brings you here? Do you not understand you're in danger? Who is your patron?" "Well, you sent as a gift." She closed her eyes for a second, then opened them and looked right into his eyes and said, "You're Merlin, and I'm Claire. I'm your friend. I'm your friend, okay? You should let me help you. You hurt yourself." She pointed to his injured fingers. Merlin looked down, and he seemed surprised, as if he hadn't felt it at all, which maybe he hadn't. He took 2 steps backward, ran into a lab table, and knocked over a stand that held empty glass test tubes. They fell and shattered on the dirty stone floor. Merlin staggered, then sank down to sit against the wall, his face covered by bloody hands, and began to rock back and forth. "It's wrong," he moaned. "There was something important. Something I had to do. I can't remember what it was." Claire watched him, still scared to death, and then sank down to a crouch across from him. "Merlin," she said. "The door. The one I opened. Where does it go?" "Door? Doorways. Moments in time. Just moments. None of it stays. It flows like blood. You know, just like blood. I tried to bottle it, but it doesn't stay fresh. Time, I mean. Blood turns, and so does time. What's your name?" "Claire, sir. My name's Claire." He let his head fall back against the wall, and there were bloody tears running down his cheeks. "Don't trust me, Claire. Don't ever trust me." He bounced the back of his head off the wall with enough force to make Claire wince. "No, sir. I won't." "How long have I been your friend?" "Not that long." "I don't have friends," he said hollowly. "You don't, you know, when you're old as I am. You have competitors, and you have allies, but not friends. Never. You're too young. Far too young to understand that." He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, he looked mostly sane. Mostly. "He merely wants you to learn from me, yes? So you are my student?" This time, Claire just nodded. Whatever the fit was, it was leaving him. and he was empty and tired and sad again. He took off his glasses, folded them, and put them in the pocket of his coat. "You won't be able to do it," he said. "You can't possibly learn quickly enough. I nearly killed you tonight, and next time I won't be able to stop." The others. He stopped, looked briefly sick, and cleared his throat. I wasn't always like this, Claire. Please understand. Or like many of my kind. I never wanted to be a monster. I only wanted to learn. And this was a way to learn forever." Claire bit her lip. "I can understand that," she said. Amelie wants me to help you and learn from you. Do you think I'm smart enough?" "Oh, you're smart enough. Could you master the skills, given enough time? Perhaps. And you'll have no choice in the matter. She'll keep you coming until you learn. Or I destroy you." Bernie slowly lifted his head and looked at her, rational again and very steady. "Did I remind you not to trust me?" "Yes, sir. It's good advice, but just this once, ignore it, and allow me to help you." "Help?" Bernie stood up in that eerie, boneless way that he seemed to have, and rummaged around through the glass jars and beakers and test tubes until he found something that looked like red salt. He shook the container. It was about the size of a spice jar, and opened it to extract one red crystal. He touched it to his tongue, shut his eyes, and for a second, and smiled. "Yes," he said. "I thought so." He recapped it and held it out to her. "Take it." She did. It felt surprisingly heavy. "What is it?" "I have no idea what to call it," he said, "but it'll work." "What do I do with it?" "Shake a small amount into your palm, like so." He reached out for her hand. She pulled away, curling her fingers closed. And Merlin looked briefly wounded. "No. You're right. You do it." "I apologize." He handed her the shaker and made an encouraging gesture. She hesitantly turned the shaker upside down over her palm. A few red chunky crystals poured out. He wanted her to keep going, so she did, making quick jerks with the container until there was maybe half a teaspoon of the stuff piled up. Then he took the shaker from her, set it back where he'd found it, nodded at her. "Go on," he said. "Take it." "Excuse me?" He mimed popping it into his mouth. What is it again?" This time, Merlin rolled his eyes in frustration. "Take it, Claire. We don't have much time. My periods of lucidity are shorter now. I can't guarantee I won't slip again. Soon. This will help." "I don't understand. How was this stuff supposed to help?" He didn't tell her again. He just pleaded silently with her, his whole expression open and hopeful, and she finally put her hand into her mouth and tentatively tasted one of the crystals. It tasted like strawberry salt, with a bitter after-flavour. She felt an instant tiny burst of ice-cold clarity, like a strobe light going off in a darkened room full of beautiful, glittering things. "Yes," Merlin breathed. "Now you see." This time, she licked up more of the crystals, 4 or 5 of them. The bitterness was strong, barely offset by the strawberries, and the reaction was even faster. It was as though she'd been asleep, and all of a sudden she was awake. Gloriously, dizzyingly awake. The world was so sharp she felt as though even the dull, battered wood of the table could cut her. Manny picked up a book at random and opened it. He held it up in front of her, and it was like another burst of light in the darkness, brilliant and beautiful. Oh, so pretty. The way the words curved themselves around each other and cut into her brain. It was painful and perfect, and she read as fast as she could. "The essence of gold is the essence of sun, and the essence of silver is the essence of moon. You must work with each of these according to its properties. Gold in the daylight, silver in the moonlight." It all made sense to her. Total sense. Alchemy was nothing but a poet's explanation of the way matter and energy interacted, the way different surfaces vibrated at different speeds. It was physics. Nothing but physics. And she could understand how to use it now. And then it was as though the bulbs all dimmed again. "Go on, take it," Merlin said. "The dose in your hand will last for an hour or so. In that time, I can teach you a great deal. Enough, perhaps, for us to understand where we should be going." This time, Claire didn't hesitate, licking up every last bit of the red crystals. Merlin was right. The crystals lasted for a little more than an hour. He took some as well, one at a time, carefully measuring them out and making them last until finally even a red crystal couldn't drive the growing confusion out of his eyes. He was getting anxious by the end. Claire started closing the books and stacking them up on the table. The two of them were sitting cross-legged on the floor, practically buried in volumes. Merlin had jumped her from one book to another, pulling out a paragraph here and a chapter there, a chart from physics, and a page from something so old he had to teach her the language before she could understand it. I learnt languages. I learnt so much. It showed her a diagram, and hadn't been just a diagram. It had been three-dimensional and as intricate as a snowflake. Morganville hadn't just happened. It had been planned. Planned around the vampires. Planned by the vampires. Carried out by Merlin and Amelie. The founder houses. They were part of it. 13 bright, hard nodes of power in the web holding together a complex pattern of energy. It could move people from one place to another, through doorways. Although Claire didn't yet understand how to control them, but the web could do more. It could change memories. It could even keep people away, if Amelie wanted to do that. Merlin had shown her the journals too, with all his research conducted over the last 70 years in the vampire sickness. It was chilling, the way his notes degenerated from meticulous to scrawls at the end, and sometimes into nonsense. Some part of her still wondered if she couldn't just stand by and let it happen. But Merlin, what he knew, what it accomplished, and she never learnt so much. Never. Not from anyone. Maybe just a little. Maybe I could help him just a little. The influence of the crystals was dimming now, and Claire felt horribly tired. There was a steady ache in her muscles, and a feverish throb that told her this stuff wasn't exactly kind to the human body. She could feel every heartbeat pounding through her head, and everything looked so dark. So confusing. She felt a breath of air stir against her cheek, and she turned towards the stairs. Michael was descending, moving faster than she had ever seen him, and he came to a fast halt when he saw her sitting beside Merlin. He's supposed to be locked up in a cage? Yeah, I know. Claire knew she sounded bitter. She didn't care. He's sick, Michael. He's not an animal. Anyway, even if you lock him up, he'll get out. Michael looked young to her, all of a sudden, although he was older than she was, and a vampire on top of that. Claire, get up and come to me, please. Why? He's not going to hurt me. He can't help what he does. Look, Sam told me how many people he's killed. He's a vampire, Michael. Of course he's... How many he's killed in the last 2 years? It's more than all the other vampires in Morganville combined. You're not safe. Now, get up and walk over here. He's right, Merlin said. He was losing it. Claire could see that, but he was desperately hanging on to being the man who had been with her for the last hour. The gentle, funny, sweet one, ablaze with excitement and passion for showing her his world. It's time for you to go, he smiled, showing teeth, not vampire teeth. It was a very human kind of expression. I'll do alright on my own, Claire, or at least there's rarely anyone for me to harm. Amelie will send someone to look after me, and I usually can't leave here, once I forget things. It's too difficult for me to find the keys, and I can't remember how to use them once I have them, but I never forget how to kill. Your friend is right. You should go, please. Now, continue her studies. It was stupid, but she hated leaving him like this, with all the light going out in his eyes and the clouds of fear and confusion rolling in. She didn't mean to do it. It just happened. She hugged him. It was like hugging a tree. He was so surprised. He was as stiff as a block of wood. She wasn't usually sure how long it had been since anybody had touched him like this. For a second he resisted her, and then his arms went around her and she felt him heave a great sigh. Still not a hug, not really, but it was close as he was likely to get. Go away, little bird, he whispered. Hurry. She backed away. His eyes were strange again, and she knew they were out of time. Someday he won't come back. He'll just be the beast. Michael was beside her. She hadn't heard him cross the room, but his hand closed around hers, and there was real compassion in his face. Not for Merlin, though. For her. You heard him, Michael said. Hurry. She bumped into the table, and the small jar of red crystal shuddered a little, nearly tipping over. She grabbed it and put it back upright, and then thought, what if he loses this? He loses stuff all the time. She would only be keeping it safe. That was all. It helped him, right? So she ought to make sure he didn't knock it over or throw it away or something. She slipped it into her pocket. She didn't think Merlin saw, and she knew Michael didn't. Claire felt a hot burst of something. Shame? Embarrassment? Excitement? I should put it back. But really, she'd never find it again if he moved it around. Merlin wouldn't remember. He wouldn't even know it was gone. She kept looking back all the way up the stairs. By the time they were halfway out, Merlin had already forgotten them, and he was restlessly flipping through a pile of books, muttering anxiously to himself. Gone already. He looked up at them and snarled, and she saw the hard glint of fangs. She hurried to the door at the top of the stairs. Hello everyone, thank you for listening to the audio file or audio reading I've done of a Rachel Kane book. I'm putting this in there, so if you want to skip past this bit and move on to the next video, that's fine by me. This is just like a cancer plug, because I want to do this, as well as also I have to do this, because the thing you've just listened to is illegal for me to do without having a charity case behind it, which I don't want it to be like a situation like, oh, I'm only doing this for the sake of cancer, which I'm actually doing this for the sake of cancer, but I did cancel this series a long time ago. It came to my recent attention that I should redo this in a better format, and I feel like now is a perfect opportunity to actually restart this in the worst possible way. Back in 1st of November, back in 2020, Rachel Kane sadly passed away to a rare bone cancer called sarcoma. Now, in the description below is going to be a link that you can. It's going to be a link so you can support the research into helping people survive and defeat sarcoma bone cancer and soft tissue cancer cells and all that stuff. So that's just going to be in the description right there down below. It is in pounds for those American ones, but obviously PayPal and all the research still goes to the same thing, because once it's being cured, once they found a cure for it or found an easier solution for it and stuff like that, it does get sent around all around the world, because everyone works on the same thing all over the world. It's just that this charity is based in UK. I live in the UK, so it still goes to the same goal to beat sarcoma for a long time, and I feel like this is the best opportunity to work with it for any Rachel King books that we do during the Morganville series or any future series that we do. Obviously, this is even going to be in the future series if we do them. So any book that we do by Rachel Kane is going to have this at the end, just to plug a little bit of a cancer support for people with sarcoma, because it is a rare cancer, and there is not a very good survival rate. So just putting that in there to help people or to support the issues that are out there, because I'm not going to get any money from these videos at all, even in like the present one. I'm not getting any money of this recording, or in the future, if possibly I do. But this is not what I'm about. This is all about for what Rachel Kane succumbed to in the end. So hopefully that as a team together we can beat sarcoma and end one of the cancers that are killing people, because no one likes that. But anyway, have a good day.